Welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and thank you for joining me today. There is a lot of news to get to tonight. I'm deeply grateful that you all are here. There are many independent news media platforms, but you've chosen to check out the Jeremiah Patterson Show tonight. So thank you for watching. Thank you for clicking on this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We have a huge show tonight. I've been working on many behind-the-scenes projects. A lot of them are going to be coming out this week. Professor Tobias Gibson is here tonight to discuss the Trump administration's attacks on universities and what this means for academic freedom. We also have reporting on Signalgate Part 2. Yes, there is a Part 2 because, of course, with incompetence, this administration breeds scandals, and it's like a new scandal every week. But goodness, here we go. So, again, huge show tonight, a lot happening in the news, Signalgate Part 2, a whole bunch of international news as well. There's a lot going on. But I want to start with that very first story there, because this is something that's critically important, something that we knew that was going to happen, and it now is actually unfolding. It was mentioned in Project 2025. It was mentioned way before. And that is the attack on universities. And I want to sort of start here at the outset with the history of essentially where that comes from and the history of the leaders who essentially helped cultivate that movement. President Richard Nixon was not very fond of, professors and universities. As a matter of fact, he didn't even like the fact that there were student-led protests at colleges. They were too problematic. He referred to them as the radical left. This is from the front page of the New York Times on May 2nd, 1970. The headline there reads, "Nixon puts bums label on some college radicals." Quote, President Nixon referred today to some campus radicals who violently oppose his Vietnam policies as bums. And in contrast, he said American soldiers were the greatest. The president's remarks on violence at universities and the war were made to a group of civilian employees who greeted him at the Pentagon, where he went for a briefing on the new United States military operations in Cambodia. Quote, "You see the bums, blowing up the campuses? Listen, the boys that are on the college campuses today are the luckiest people in the world, going to the greatest universities. And here they are burning up the books, storming around about the issue. You name it, get rid of the war, there will be another one." So this is a year into Nixon's presidency. This is a year into Nixon's first term as president. And his language here on college campuses' protest and dissent is completely different than what he said as a presidential candidate back in 1968. Back in 1968, when Nixon was asked this question, "What do you think about college dissent, sir?" He said that dissent is good and that it should be tolerated because that's what separates us from a totalitarian government that cracks down on free speech. But when Nixon actually gets into office, there was a whole different sentiment about dissent over the Vietnam War on college campuses. He viewed it more as a nuisance than a liberty under the First Amendment. And it was 2 days after Nixon gave those remarks that on May 4th, 1970, the Ohio National Guard fired on a crowd of unarmed student protesters, killing 4 people and wounding 9. And what that did is that escalated things even more between anti-war protesters and the government because they were voicing their opposition to something that they did not believe in, and now they were being killed. It was absolutely catastrophic. Peaceful protesters shot at. 4 killed, 9 wounded. This was catastrophic also politically for the Nixon administration. But they doubled down on it. Nixon referred to what happened here, essentially calling the blame here on the campus radicals, because that's who were to blame for the fact that they got shot and killed. It was also after the Kent State shootings that Nixon's aides compiled a list of radical professors and radical schools to go after. Nixon's own vice president, Spiro Agnew, criticized the, quote, impudent snubs, end quote, in academia. Nixon also referred to university campuses as havens for communist and sexual deviants. So there was an intense disdain here. And at the time, this wasn't just an isolated situation where Nixon hated universities and professors. This was really something that was felt more broadly in the conservative movement, that there was something seriously wrong here to address. We need to get to the bottom of who and what is wrong with America. And oh yeah, the universities are in that equation as well. Because what they really believed is that if you went to college, you were a liberal. Or if you were going to go to college and you were not a liberal, you were definitely going to come out as a liberal because you would be indoctrinated by your professor. I mean, conservatives were so worried about what was happening back then that they literally got together and wrote a memo. This is from the infamous Lewis Powell memo. Quote, "There always has been critics of the system whose criticism has been wholesome and constructive so long as the objective was to improve rather than subvert or destroy." This is what they really thought, not joking here. Quote, "But what now concerns us is quite new in the history of America. We are not dealing with episodic or isolated attacks from a relatively few extremists or even from the minority socialist cadre. Rather, the assault on the enterprise system is broadly based on consistently pursed. It is gaining momentum and converts. The sources are varied and diffused. They include not unexpectedly the communists, new leftists, and other revolutionaries who would destroy the entire system, both political and economic. These extremists of the left, are far more numerous, better financed, and increasingly are more welcome and encouraged by other elements of society than ever before in our history. But they remain a small minority and are not yet the principal cause for concern. The most disquieting voices joining the chorus of criticism come from perfectly respectable elements of society, from the college campuses, the pulpit, the media, the intellectual and literary journals. Journals. Goodness. Sorry, guys. It's been a long, terrible week. And the week just started with the news. Let me continue here. The arts and sciences, and from the politicians. End quote. Lewis Powell then goes essentially to lay out a 3-point call to action of what we should do to get the government back in check. Number 1, infiltrate the colleges. Number 2, infiltrate the media. And number 3, infiltrate the government. And right after that memo was published, Lewis Powell is picked by President Nixon to be a Supreme Court justice. Of course, let's put the man on the Supreme Court that wrote this incredible blueprint to completely reinvent the federal government for conservative comfort to be on the Supreme Court. Nixon saw that as a win. It worked. Powell was confirmed to the Supreme Court. But Nixon was still enraged with those college protesters. This was something that was deeply embedded in the conservative movement at this point. Something had to be done. And so what he did is he used the powers of the enormously powerful federal government to go after and attack academics and universities. More specifically, those that he saw as opponents to his administration. He ordered the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, to essentially conduct surveillance operations targeting student activists and anti-war professors. Because, of course, launching attacks on Cambodia as president of the United States and then having the presidents of 37 colleges and universities say, "Hey, Mr. President, that's not a good idea. You should end U.S. military involvement in Southeast Asia immediately." That was annoying to the administration. That was a nuisance. So, of course, let's announce counterintelligence surveillance operations on professors. University campuses were infiltrated with informants from the FBI. Once again, my brain, the fog here. It's been a crazy week, but we're going to get through here. Stay with me here. Many professors were also essentially who supported the protest, who supported the students that were protesting the war in Vietnam. They were threatened with job loss or faced external pressure campaigns. Nixon's famous enemy list also included a bunch of professors, and he even ordered the IRS to audit some of them as a form of retaliation and, political intimidation. 11 days before Christmas, though, in December of 1972, Nixon and Henry Kissinger at the time, his national security advisor, were sitting in the Oval Office along with Alexander Haig, the Deputy Assistant for National Security Affairs. And Nixon always recorded his meetings. It ultimately is what led to his demise. But listen closely to what he tells Kissinger and Haig while they're in the room. The professors are the enemy. Professors are our enemy. Write that on a blackboard 100 times and never forget it. President Richard Nixon in 1972 expressing his extreme repulsion with the press, the establishment, and college professors. He was not fond of intellectuals and dissenting voices and the very institutions that foster critical thinking and accountability. Nixon's comment wasn't just, hyperbole or throwaway line. It encapsulated a broader war that he was waging here, not just against the press or the political establishment, but also against the idea of an informed and questioning public. Because what do authoritarians hate? An informed and educated public. Because that is a direct threat. Because if people are able to have the ability to critically think and to challenge the norms and the institutions in society, then that breeds progression, not regression. It's easy to regress as a society if people don't know that they are regressing. It's harder to do that if you have, people who are very smart, people who go to colleges that actually challenge your critical thinking. But by casting professors, the educators that shape young minds and often challenge orthodoxy as enemies, Nixon exposed his paranoia about essentially academics' power to influence political thought and social change. This wasn't merely about universities, it was about control. It was about stifling criticism, curbing dissent, and labeling anyone who dared essentially to question his authority as a threat to the nation, as a threat, because yes, those people are the enemy. And in many ways, Nixon's resentment here reflected essentially a recurring tension in the conservative movement in American life, the clash between authoritarianism tendencies and democratic ideals. His words remind us essentially how easily power can turn education into a target. How quickly those who teach the truth can brand enemies by those who fear it. This was the Nixon presidency here. But that ideology, drenched in conservative paranoia, didn't just, start with Nixon. It didn't take long to resurface either. This was then Republican Senate candidate J.D. Vance in 2021.
We have to honestly and aggressively attack the universities in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, the universities do not pursue knowledge and truth. They pursue deceit and lies, and it's time to be honest about that fact. And we subsidize, we support, and in our own ways, all of us reinforce the power of universities to control our lives and control how we live them. So much of what drives truth and knowledge as we understand it in this country is fundamentally determined by, supported by, and reinforced by the universities in this country. The simple fact is that our universities tell the powerful what they want to hear, and they couch it in ridiculous political rhetoric instead of dealing with the real consequences of progressive policy. Why, ladies and gentlemen, are school children learning from school teachers that America is a fundamentally racist and evil country? Because those same school teachers learned it from some progressive professor at a university 10 or 15 years ago. This is the world created by universities that care more about fake culture wars, that care more about identity politics, that care more about diversity, equity, and inclusion than they do their own society and they do the people who live in it.
That was J.D. Vance in November of 2021 speaking at a conservative conference about why the universities are the enemy. He went on to win in the midterm election, getting elected senator, and not too long after that, he got picked to be the vice presidential candidate for the Trump 2024 campaign. I remember getting off of work when that happened in the summer of 2024 and feeling sick to my stomach that J.D. Vance was announced as Trump's pick, because I knew that speeches like that had existed. And it really was the sense that with Trump and Vance, yes, Vance was this obscure senator from Ohio, relatively young in his political career. But for Vance to be picked as the VP, knowing his back history there is horrific, because it's literally Project 2025 unstoppable with those two at the helm, Trump and Vance in office. But what we are seeing right now is all of this come to pass. All of this is coming to form. Project 2025 being put to work. The Trump-Vance administration is now going after the universities. First, it was Harvard. in a demanding letter, which included ending DEI programs. Another thing that they wanted to do essentially was to allow a federal overseer to be appointed to audit every course on the campus to see if it met the ideological views of the Trump-Vance administration. And the federal official would then require Harvard to hire all new teachers, essentially, to then, according to the new guidance, teach the way that the administration, preferred. But the university did not cave, and federal funding was paused, and they were threatened with an IRS exemption situation that happened. And now, this week, Harvard Law School is suing the Trump administration for what they have done here. Because, of course, the president of the United States cannot just, threaten universities here by, revoking funding and, threatening to go after them with the IRS. But there was that one guy that did it, Richard Nixon, because of course the professors are the enemy. The professors are the enemy. Write that down on a blackboard 100 times and never forget it. This is something that is deeply embedded in the conservative movement, that they really genuinely believe that the professors are the enemy. Because, of course, teaching critical race theory, teaching, diversity, equity, and inclusion and its importance in building a more uniformed and collective, homogenous society is, in their view, deeply, deeply disturbing. Because progression is regression for them. Progression is regression for conservatives. Because, of course, they'd rather reshape the government to have it work, to have it be better for conservatives and not for the whole of all of society. And so, yes, they are going after the universities now. And yes, we have seen universities, build these inner defense, compacts, essentially, to protect themselves. That has been growing. An attack on one university is an attack on all. We have been seeing that growing because, of course, the Trump administration is not just going to stop with Harvard here. They are going to go after other universities and other universities and other universities. And some of them will cave. Some of them may not. But what this is here is an attack on intellectual freedom, on academic independence, on academic prosperity by reshaping, curtailing, and stifling the way that students are taught in this country. By learning the history of slavery, by learning the history of the civil rights movement in this country, that does not teach you to hate America. It teaches you to essentially, critically think about what that happened and to challenge and to hate the systemic racism that is embedded in nearly all institutions in this country. But what the Trump-Vance administration is saying here is that, by teaching these courses, students are taught to hate America. That is not true. They're taught to essentially critically think here and to be deeply, deeply repulsed about that history of this country. But their goal here and the attack on the universities is deeply concerning because what that does point to really is a situation of a nation that is authoritarian, where every part of civic life is controlled by the administration, by the regime, by the people in power. There is no freedom whatsoever, not intellectually. Why do you think he wants to dismantle the Department of Education? In regard to a university that is sort of giving in and has wholly is Columbia University, shutting down dissent and pro-Palestinian protest. So we have seen that. We have seen that been happening. But in the broader context of the Trump-Vance administration's attacks on the norms and our democratic ideals in this country, we also have seen their attacks on judges. The No Rogue Ruling Act passed by the House of Representatives recently, which, of course, if signed into law, it would effectively curtail judges in this country, federal judges, from issuing nationwide injunctions. That has been key here because it essentially has been stopping a lot of what the Trump administration has been doing. Back in February, it was reported that the Trump administration, by a federal judge, that federal judge saying that they openly defied their order. The Trump administration appearing to disregard, orders even from the highest court in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court. We are in a situation where we are facing a constitutional crisis. And it is a situation where, as we're going to get to the point where, what does this mean for us as a country? Because we have three branches of government. We have a system, three co-equal branches of government, each to keep one in check. What does this mean for us as a country when we inevitably get to the point where, if the Supreme Court hands down a ruling that the president does not like or does not agree with, that Trump then essentially orders or tries to dismantle the United States Supreme Court? They're already trying to, dismantle the way that federal judges work by, passing the No Rule Rulings Act. Let's make it to whereas federal judges cannot issue nationwide injunctions. Yeah, so they can't stop anything that we're doing. What is that going to look like when Trump tries to do the same thing with the Supreme Court? I mean, he said he wanted to be a dictator on day one. 77 million people still voted him into office. Now we're facing the enactment of the Project 2025 agenda. Now we're facing the enactment here of every single thing that was said on the campaign trail. What does that look like? And what does the attack on universities mean in a broader context? And should we be concerned of how dangerous this could get? Westminster College professor Tobias Gibson joins me next. Stay with us. So, I just wrote a book. It's called Resistance, a strategic guide on how to fight back, defend democracy, and avoid a Trump dictatorship. A lot of people have been feeling heartache and despair and despondency after the 2024 election. And that definitely is widely understandable, especially when you consider the guy who's literally about to be sworn in as president as someone who said that he was going to terminate the Constitution and be a dictator on day one. So in my new book, Resistance, what you get is 7 rules on how to defend democracy, to avoid authoritarianism, and how to literally fight back. It is compelling, richly historic, and a call to action. Resistance, out now. The link is in my bio. It's in my link tree. And once you click on the link tree link, you have like 3 different versions of the book pop up. Get your copy today. Earlier today, I had the chance to speak with Professor Tobias Gibson. He specializes in legal studies, political science, and is also the Security Studies Program Director at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. Professor Gibson joined me earlier, and this was our interview. The Trump administration sent a demand letter to Harvard University, and one of the points was to allow a federal overseer to be appointed to audit every single course on campus to see if it met the ideological views of the administration, and the federal official would then require Harvard to hire all new teachers to then teach according to that new guidance. The university did not cave, and federal funding was paused. They are now suing the Trump administration. From a legal standpoint, and also with federal funding being paused, what authority does a president or an administration have to punish or pressure universities for, political or ideological reasons?
The short answer is the presidents and administrations should not have any authority. The tool that the Trump administration is using is obviously, millions, if not billions of dollars of federal grants and those types of things for research and other programming. In theory, at least, the government could go after student loans for students who are interested in studying at Harvard and other, at Columbia, UCLA, and other schools that have also come under, the thumb or attack or however you want to describe it, of the Trump administration. Legally, my suspicion is that Harvard will likely win this. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, again, there is no entity that should require the presidential administration of either party of dictating what is or is not in syllabi and other course content. But in addition to that, based on sort of what we're seeing with law firms. When
Hmm.
the law firms opt to fight back, judges are granting more or less at least immediate TROs, temporary restraining orders, on presidential action meant to punish the law firms. And I suspect that we will see at least something like a similar decision from judges, if from in Massachusetts and in other states. So
Do you see a link between the attacks on universities and broader efforts to dismantle DEI programs and censor certain books, sort of as a way to reshape, intellectual freedom in this country, to push us towards something more authoritarian based, where it's only, certain information being taught based off how certain people want it to be taught?
I see links between the attacks on universities and lots of and lots of things. I think, to be sure, DEI is a part of that. I think that I mean, universities for, I mean, probably depending on which universities, but for, 80 to 100 years, at least more or less, have been allowing African Americans and Asians and women and, into not just the classroom as students, but into the classroom as professors,
Hmm.
um, into the classroom as deans, or I'm sorry, into the administration as deans and presidents. Um, and so I think that it makes sense. Let me reword that. Given the interest in minimizing or even canceling DEI, it makes sense um, that the administration would opt to go after universities. But I think it's bigger than that. I think that the Trump administration is going after uh, institutions of ideas.
Mm.
So again, universities, big law firms, I mean, there's been discussion ongoing for a few decades that I'm aware of about, liberal Hollywood and those types of things
Yeah.
as well. Um, the attacks on the media began when President Trump was beginning to run for office the first time,
Yeah.
against CNN and, his current battle with AP and, just sort of et cetera, CBS. And so I think that this wide-ranging, seemingly scattershot attack is much more precision based than I think people are recognizing.
We've seen various moments under this new Trump administration where we've seen, them defy the federal courts in terms of rulings, defying the Supreme Court rulings regarding mass deportation in this country. What do you make of the effort here to not only curtail the judicial branch, but completely disregard its rulings? And where does that put us as a nation in terms of, having a constitution and being a representative republic?
There are at least two questions there. One of those is that I think that the administration and its allies are purposefully attempting to minimize the impact that judges can have. Um, as you know, the the U.S. House has passed a bill that would attempt to well, that would limit
Hmm.
the nationwide scope of some judicial injunctions. In and of itself, I actually nationwide injunctions are at least somewhat problematic. I mean, um, in that um, we as I said yesterday on a different podcast, um, we like them when we agree with the outcome. We dislike them when we disagree with the outcome. And so there have been many examples of so-called forum shopping with a judge in Texas under the Biden administration, for example, in which uh, Kazmarek is his name, Judge Kazmarek. Um, where lawsuits were filed in Texas that then had nationwide implications over things like mifepristone, for example.
Hmm.
Um, and so what I think it is necessary, or at least not bad, to have a debate about whether or not we want to have nationwide injunctions. Uh, that being said, 2 years ago, many of these same House members who passed this law, who passed this bill in the House, were applauding Kaczmarek among other conservative judges.
Hmm.
Um, um, there's a wider spread issue. There are administration officials, and members of Congress, and conservative pundits who are talking about impeaching judges, who have the audacity to follow the rule of law and rule against um, questionable, if not egregious, actions on the part of the president and his administration. Um, there's ongoing concern about the security of judges. So 4 or 5, 6 days ago, federal judges have requested increased security in the national budget so that the security of judges of on either side of the political debate can be more secure. And I want to stress that part. You may recall that a couple or 3 years ago, Justice Kavanaugh, there was a would-be assassin arrested outside of Justice Kavanaugh's house. This is not a partisan. Uh, it should not be a partisan debate as to whether or not federal and, quite frankly, state and local judges, but that federal judges and justices are protected by those who are aggrieved by them, from those who are aggrieved by them. Your other question was about, I think the language may be a little bit convoluted because it's been a couple of minutes now. So my apologies, but you asked about, I think, something along the lines of the wholesale disregard of the Trump administration ignoring Supreme Court rulings or something along those lines.
Hmm.
Um, I would argue that it's not wholesale disregard. Um, I know what you mean, I will say again today, as I did yesterday, I am aware of I'm aware that there is human cost to the Abrego Garcia decision, and the decision to deport him, the decision to not seek his return. Um, and I want to acknowledge that it is terrible that this is happening to a man who, as near as I can tell from the media, does not deserve this.
Hmm.
That being said, uh, there was a case in which on Saturday night, Friday night, I don't remember, it was 1 a.m. and now I can't remember if it was 1 a.m. on Saturday or 1 a.m. on Sunday. So either Friday or Saturday night, the Supreme Court forbid the Trump administration from deporting Venezuelans from by using the Alien Enemies Act, and before the Supreme Court issued its ruling, an ICE bus that had 28 detainees on it turned around from the airport and took the detainees back to where they were being held. As an example, and so there is disregard for the Supreme Court's wording on returning Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I don't think that there is yet, at least, wholesale disregard for judicial decision making. Does that distinction make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay.
What would, with regard to that, what would wholesale disregard look like? And what would, I guess, the enhancing of using the Department of Justice as a political weapon look like?
I think we're beginning to see at least inklings of both of those. The fact that a sitting judge is openly mocking a Supreme Court decision even if it is a case and that case involves a single individual. Um, I think that is a concerning. Um, I think it is concerning. And there are those who are more concerned about it than I am. I don't know if you listen to the Ezra Klein show, but Ezra Klein, a few days ago, I don't remember if it's his last episode of his podcast or not, but within the last 7 to 10 days at least, he's had a podcast show that says the title of which I believe is "The Emergency Is Here."
Hmm.
Um, I disagree with him, but only again, to on scale, not necessarily on intent. Um, the as long as the Trump administration is not mass deporting based on the Alien Enemies Act, the Trump administration is sort of slow rolling a federal judge in Maryland, about Cenes about Obregon Garcia's case. But again, it is the individual instance as opposed to wide scale. Um, Slow rolling in this regard. If that were to stop, I mean, if that were to continue, she's given the Trump administration, I think, 2 weeks, and about a week of it is in. If it occurred in more districts and more trial courts, that would be an issue. If there's a judge in Florida, I think, and now I'm forgetting her name, but has said that every detainee has the right to due process um, before being deported, and that would and therefore required individual trials for each of the detainees. Trump has said that that's impossible. Um, if it proves to be impossible for the administration and they opt to act upon it without that due process, that judicially required, articulated due process, then that might be an issue. And now I'm sorry, I don't actually remember your second question. But again, does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Lastly, I wanted to ask you about the emerging politicization that's happening at DOJ with Pam Bondi and other officials. We've seen senior level officials at FBI and DOJ being pushed out. There was this speech that Trump gave at DOJ a couple of weeks ago regarding, just the prior administration and what he views as political persecution. There is, and there always has been a distinct reason why, AG and the president are separate and really are not supposed to have a close relationship. What do you make of what's happening right now?
This is a good example of norms and customs versus law. There is no constitutional or statutory mandate about the independence and not divide, but independence, I guess, between the AG and the president. Um, because there is no law, it is easier to break custom than law,
Hmm.
regardless of how we feel about it, because you don't mess with tradition. um, um, it is going to become problematic, and at least arguably part of the reason why the Supreme Court is willing to push back, as it has that again, I think Saturday night ruling, that case seems to be indicating that the judiciary is not as trustworthy of the lawyers, let me reword that, of the government lawyers that are that are arguing cases in front of the judiciary. And again, you're seeing individual judges, Boasberg, Zinis, and others that are absolutely not having um, lawyers not answering questions as the judges think that they should.
Hmm.
Um, and before that, you actually had some attorneys who were arguing that they simply couldn't answer questions that seems to be sort of politically based. And that has to do with, professional norms. When someone goes to law school, they take classes in legal ethics, but moreover, they are also bound to legal ethics by virtue of the bar association of their state. I think that the Department of Justice is flirting with disaster because individual lawyers are bound, not just to the DOJ, but again, they have a literal moral code, a literal professional moral code that if they purposefully, willingly don't abide by it, they can be disbarred, which means that they can't practice law. And that's a big deal to the individual lawyers who make up DOJ. And in addition to that, because they're firing attorneys, attorneys are also quitting, but there's a hiring freeze, a federal hiring freeze, and when the hiring freeze is lifted, it will be, I don't know who wants to work at DOJ. I mean, I think that some people might argue that, Trump followers or, acolytes or, conservative ideologues or something along those lines might, but it may not be the safest place to practice because if they abide by their professional standards, then they may be fired. And then if they don't abide by their professional standards, then they may be disbarred. And so, it's sort of a catch-22. Again, I'm reading media, I'm reading media accounts, but it doesn't seem like a safe work environment professionally, and law firms used to want to hire former DOJ attorneys because they know the law better than anybody. I mean, they know the law very well. But if they survive a 4 or 8 year or whatever, Trump and then other Republican term, I don't know. I mean, based on, again, what we seem to know about the way that DOJ is performing, it's not clear to me that there's a path forward to them in the private sector either. And so I think that DOJ is flirting with at least mid to long-term disaster. I don't know if that's exactly how you wanted me to answer the question, but does that also make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Once again, my interview with Professor Tobias Gibson. Thank you so much for coming on the show and giving your perspective. Invaluable as always.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Welcome back. So there is an update on our story here regarding the Trump administration going after universities. The Trump Secretary of Education just said that she has spoken with both colleges, essentially Harvard University as well as Columbia University, about, quote, abiding by the law. Of course, nothing that the Trump administration is doing here is actually legal because they're politically pressuring these colleges to essentially adhere to these demands or their federal funding is going to be revoked. I mean, colleges are supposed to operate as, independent academic institutions. What the Trump administration is trying to do is essentially install something far more authoritarian where they have control over the education system. Harvard has not agreed to that. Their lawsuit mentions that this is an attack on free speech, and this is going to be an interesting litigation as this plays out. So we wanted to bring you this special report tonight here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to comment down below and to let us know your thoughts. Share this with your family and friends friends if you enjoyed this as well. As always, this is independent journalism. Your donations are crucial as we continue this work here. You can donate to the Jeremiah Patterson Show financially here. These are the ways to do that. Also, be sure to follow us on Blue Sky and Substack to never miss news updates, exclusives, special reports, and other content that we're going to be releasing, such as a resistance podcast focused on the history of resistance in the past and how the citizens and others have fought back to regain power. So check that out on Substack, and also check us out on Blue Sky as well, the Jeremiah Patterson Show. We're also on TikTok, where we have short form content, but it's concise, and you still get the news in that same form. So thank you all for watching this video on the Jeremiah Patterson Show. Take care. I'm going to get ready now to prepare for a bit of a news show, so stay tuned.